Gospel according to John. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus. Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, Jesus said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the religious leaders were just now trying to stone you, and are you going there again? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble, because they see the light of this world. But those who walk at night stumble, because the light is not in them. After saying this, Jesus told them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will be all right. Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought that he was referring merely to sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. For your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him. Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed home. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, the teacher is here and is calling for you. And when Mary heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. Those who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They found her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and those who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus began to weep. So the people said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, take the stone away. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, already there is a stench, because he has been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, did not I tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, But I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Many of those, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him. The Gospel of Jesus Christ.
Praise to you, O Christ.
My John certainly has a lot to say, doesn't he? Jesus is very wordy. Can these bones come to life? In his vision, the prophet Ezekiel heard God put the question to him, and he looked out over a landscape of bones as far and as vast as he could see. But they weren't just any bones. They were dry bones. We tend to think of bones as kind of a framework for the body, kind of like the wood framing for a house, you know? And yes, bones are certainly that. We'd be pretty floppy without them. But bones are something more. Bones contain marrow. And red bone marrow is responsible for creating red blood cells, platelets, and lymphocytes. So not only do our bones support our immune systems, they're also responsible for creating our blood, and that's really important. For the biblical people, blood was synonymous with life. That's why Jews who keep kosher don't eat anything made with blood. And that's why at God's table, when we receive the blood of Christ, we receive the very substance of Christ into ourselves, the life of Christ. So Ezekiel, priest and prophet, looked out over the dry bones. Human one, can these bones come to life? Now Ezekiel knew the answer to that, or at least he thought he did. After all, the bones had no marrow and no life in them and no possibility of new life. And not only that, for those people, it was necessary for resurrection. There had to be a body. It had to be all in one place. If the bones were scattered like these bones were, there was no possibility of any kind of resurrection ever. That was the thinking of the people of the time. But Ezekiel, he'd been God's prophet and priest a long time, long enough to know it wasn't a good idea to second guess God, even in a vision. So he skirted the issue. He answered, "Well, God, you alone know that." But God wasn't finished. God told Ezekiel, "Prophesy over these bones. Say to them, dry bones, hear the word of the Most High. Thus says God Most High to these bones, see, I will bring spirit into you, that you may come to life. I will put sinews upon you, make flesh grow over you, cover you with skin, and put spirit in you, so that you may come to life and know that I am sovereign. I'm the one in charge." Ezekiel heard the bones rattling and the sinews and muscle attached to them and the skin cover them, and then God blew the spirit of life into them. And then Ezekiel heard God say that these bones were the whole house of Israel, who had been saying, "Our bones are dried up, our hope is lost, and we are cut off." I wonder if you've ever felt as if your bones were dried up, as if you had no life left in you, as if you had no hope, as if you were cut off from the land of the living. I wonder how many isolated people there are still feeling that way now, because people felt more like that during the pandemic, and not all of them are safe being out and about even now. God told Ezekiel, prophesy and say to the dry bones, say to the people of Israel, thus says God Most High, O my people, I will open your graves and have you rise from them and bring you back to the land of Israel. Then you shall know that I am sovereign when I open your graves and have you rise from them, O my people. I will put my spirit in you that you may live, and I will settle upon you your land. Thus you shall know that I am sovereign. I have promised, and I will do it, says the Most High. The dry bones in Ezekiel's vision were the people of God. The message God's people needed to hear was that they had become like a collection of dried up bones with no life in them. But God called them back to life again. Not in the by and by, but right there in the midst of what was going on in the real world at that time. It was God's intention to give them what they needed to build muscle and flesh upon those bones, and by power of the Spirit to breathe new life into them. This lesson has particular significance for God's people today. Across the country, congregations are struggling. Often small congregations. Imagine that. If only they were bigger, they wouldn't be having these problems, but that just isn't so. A few years ago, a friend of mine, well, we're friends now. I got to know her when we were doing the spiritual exercises of Ignatius together in 2000. She was the president of a huge congregation, a Presbyterian congregation in Menlo Park, 10,000 people. And she was complaining to us about their $2 million deficit. Can you imagine that? Their deficit was more than our entire budget for years, maybe even decades. The landscape of dry bones is vast and stretches out as far as the eye can see and beyond. Today, most of the people of the West Coast are unchurched, and the unchurched people, the unchurched are not people who used to go to Sunday school when they were little and have fallen away. That was true a generation ago. It's not true now. Most of them are people who never attended any church or were part of any faith community, even as children. When you think of mission, what comes to your mind? Many of us might think right away of somewhere out there, maybe in Africa or Asia or South America. But for those of us living in Western Washington, the so-called mission field is right outside the doors of our church buildings. It's people in our own communities who need to know the radical love and acceptance of God. Imagine that you're Ezekiel, looking out over the vast valley of dry bones, and God says to you, can this church live? How do you answer? Hear Ezekiel's vision again. Dry bones, hear the word of the Most High. Thus says God Most High, see, I will bring spirit into you that you may come to life. I will put sinews upon you, make flesh grow over you, cover you with skin, and put spirit in you so that you may come to life and know that I am sovereign. I'm in charge. The Spirit came into them. They came alive and stood upright, a vast army. Then God said, these bones are the whole church of Christ in Western Washington. They've been saying, for 100 years and more, we've been faithful. We've built churches. We've worshiped regularly. We've built big Sunday schools and made Vacation Bible School available to our communities and made confirmation fun. We've had potlucks. We've invited our neighbors. But our churches are more than half empty. Young people don't come. Contributions haven't kept up with expenses, and we've had to make cuts in programs and ministry. Our bones are dried up. Our hope is lost, and we are cut off. Therefore, prophesy to them and say, thus says God Most High, O my people, I will open your graves and have you rise from them. Then you shall know that I am sovereign when I open your graves and have you rise from them, O my people. Now, is God promising to make this congregation or any congregation what we remember that it was 50 years ago? No, of course not. God doesn't promise to take us back to the past. That's not what God was promising Ezekiel in his original vision either. Rather, God promises us new life, and that new life will be different from the old life. I will put my spirit in you that you may live. Thus you shall know that I am sovereign. I have promised and I will do it, says the Most High. Do we dare to trust the promises of God, or do we imagine that Ezekiel's vision was a message for people 2,500 years ago and has nothing to do with us today? Many long years ago, I took my first course in anatomy. Page after page and after page about what muscles attach where, the chemistry of muscle contraction, how it works, what the various cranial nerves are called. That was fun. Made for pretty dry reading. And lectures weren't much more interesting. It was very academic. And if there hadn't been anything more to it, I don't know how I would have made it through. But the lab portion of the course made anatomy one of the most interesting classes I took in college. When we studied bones, we didn't just read about bones or look at pictures of bones. We picked them up, felt the weight of them, noticed the various textures and colorings, looked at them from different angles. By the time of my bone practicum, I had no trouble naming each little fossa and foramen and tuberosity. To learn about the bones, I had to get right down in there among them. The bones had to become real for me. If the church is going to live, it won't be because we've learned the statistics on decline in mainline churches or read some books on church growth. If the church is going to live, it will be because God has breathed new life into us and made discipleship real for us. I have promised, and I will do it, says our God. So do we dare to trust the promise? Or are we more comfortable in the quiet darkness of the grave? I remember a friend telling me about the time she spent in treatment for cancer. She said there were times I was so sick, I was sick unto death. I was tired of fighting, tired of the whole damn thing, and I just wanted to die. I imagine that's how it must have been for Lazarus in today's gospel reading. At the end, he was so sick that death must have come as welcome relief. No more discomfort, no more suffering. I wonder how it was for him when he heard Jesus calling him back into life. Maybe not so different from how it is for congregations when we hear Jesus calling us back into life. Maybe the voice seemed a long way off. Maybe Lazarus hesitated just a bit, just as we do. Yet the gentle but power-filled and commanding voice of Jesus called Lazarus, come out. Jesus is calling the people of Christ the King back into life. That isn't the end of the story, though. In our gospel lesson, when Lazarus stumbled haltingly from the dark of the tomb into the light of day from the grave, in his grave clothes, Jesus saw to it that he was unbound right away. And in Ezekiel's vision, God did not demand that the dry bones get up and get on with business of living without muscle to allow movement or skin to protect the flesh. Rather, God built new bodies on the framework of those bones and breathed new life into them. Thus says God to God's people in Midland, Tacoma. The name Lazarus means God has helped. God has helped us in the past, and God will help us now. In our gospel reading, Jesus' close friend Martha chastises him, saying, "If you had been there, my brother wouldn't have died." Even Jesus' closest friends blamed him for not doing enough. Have we experienced that? Have we blamed Jesus for not doing enough, not being enough? Even as we journey through the wilderness, through the very darkest places, we know that Easter's just right around the corner. God won't leave us in this place. We tell the story again and again through our readings, through the pattern of the church year, and in the celebration of the sacraments, because we need to be reminded that God will help us even when things seem hopeless. We need to hear again and again God's words of promise. "O my people, I will open your graves and have you rise from them. I will unbind you and put my spirit in you that you may live. Thus you shall know that I am sovereign. I'm in charge. I have promised, and I will do it, says God Most High."